Welcome. I think we're live. I've actually said that every single time now, so I don't want to miss the pattern. But I think we're live. I think you guys and gals can hear us fairly decently as the line shows, so we'll get started. Um, I have someone that I'm proud to call a friend, a colleague, someone that has helped me through I mean this, but has helped me through my own imposter syndrome at times, right? As we fought the battles together towards, securing our combined entities when I was at MSP. And so I have my friend Nathan Taylor with me, and we're going to talk about something that is cyber related, but it's really burnout. It's really this understanding that we lose, we lose, we lose, we lose, we lose, and as MSPs, we're not used to that. I mean, we're for the most part solving problems, and we're having to overcome some stupid things, but for the most part, we win. And I understood as I was a technician burning the midnight oil, how I didn't get burned out was because I felt like I was accomplishing something. So this is your idea, Nathan. I'll kind of let you kick us off and let's get the chatter started. Real bit of housekeeping is if you like this, please subscribe. I'm doing the horrible thing I have to do, and also please chat, interact with us, put up some comments, let us know you're here. We'll see that right here. I can barely focus on it with my left eye, but we're good, and so we'll get going. Go ahead, brother. This is your topic.
Oh, sure. Thanks for having me.
Man.
It's a topic that's become more and more of a thing that I'm realizing we need to chat about. It's kind of one of those taboos in our industry. Everybody's you get out and you talk with everybody and you talk about the cool new stuff and your successes, but the dark underbelly of our industry right now is this. Kind of
what's causing it, right?
I think it all started with COVID.
Okay.
I think the timing of COVID really was hard. So I think, like you, I started in the early 2000s, man.
Yeah.
I got into MSP because it was fun to build Exchange servers. It's like building Legos, man. I built a domain and Exchange server for every small business.
Right? They fit in the right holes.
Yeah,
100%.
And I built stuff, and when you're done, and if you built it right, they were stable, they were safe, they were secure.
You saw improvements in what you did, made improvements in what they did.
And then all of a sudden 365 comes along, and now I can do it 10 times better, way cheaper and
Bro,
simpler.
I was struggling with Exchange 2013 on spinning platter disks and index breaking all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And then in 365, you're like, this solves everything.
Oh, man. And so it was this years of just, I'm building stuff, I'm helping people improve.
Yeah.
And it was the confluence of COVID and cybersecurity. The threat landscape changed right as we all got...
The loss changed. The acceleration of cyber changed. I mean, we've seen... It's normalized in our linguistics. People in news are asking about. I got interviewed by a news chick about cyber. All she wanted me to do was talk about Russia. That was it. But we got there. We did talk about some things. It was pretty cool.
and at that same time, we all got locked in our basements or in our bedrooms with a computer.
Yeah.
And so you went from having this environment where I was seeing the other engineers and the other teammates every day.
You could camaraderise, you could joke, you could make up fun internal things.
People would ask if you're having a rough day because they could read your body language. Yeah. And all of a sudden you're locked at home. There's not clear boundaries. You're alone. Yep. You've got all this.
If I tear up, y'all cannot make fun of me in the audience here. This might happen today. That's why I'm sitting way back here. I'm focused.
You got to deal with all that stress, all of that, and now you've got to, and you're isolated. You don't have clear boundaries about when work stops and starts.
True story. Which was already rough if you were in the production end of engineering.
Correct.
Like for me, for sure. I mean. Yeah, we were talking about that before the show, like the dynamic nature of what a day in the life of an engineer, especially one in a growing MSP that's adding new clients all the time. So you have an onboarding load, you have a server and project load that's happening you might be involved in, you have the client load of demand and managing all of that without any of these cybersecurity conversations.
Correct.
Without any of that, we're already fighting that battle. And to paint the picture for anybody listening, we're fighting that battle with a constituency that doesn't understand the risk, didn't understand the risk most of the time in the hardware that they bought. Like even just the operational risk, most of them didn't have high availability. There wasn't multiple server loads to be able to handle N+2, right? You always had this kind of IT as a cost center mentality as well, right? So that's the landscape that exists, right? And I kind of want to make a corollary to this, right? Because in addition, when the cybersecurity world hit, and we started dealing with loss. Ransomware became rampant in 2018, really, really, really ramped up in 19 and in 20 converted to a double extortion.
And also ransomware hits.
Well, and then ransomware goes to double extortion because they start learning and start being able to recover from failures. And so then they say, well, fine, then we'll just egress the data. That was in December of 2020. Ask me how I know. Don't ask. But, the point is that ransomware ramped up. business email compromise ramped up. The ubiquitousness of an Office 365 front end with no MFA turned into BEC snipe hunting. Like, that's not true because you never catch a snipe. It's like BEC nutria rat shooting. I heard there were 25,000 of those killed last year. Sorry, very, very tangential. But you had this world where, we'd already had that, and all this risk starts happening, all this loss, and people look at us as clients and go, well, I thought you were going to protect us. And we had, to some extent, been saying those things. We had been putting in firewalls. We had been adding antivirus. But I don't think until recently we understood what the landscape of what it took to secure people was.
Right.
So my corollary, after setting that stage, was that if you look at COVID-2, and you look at the doctors, as we went into wave 2 and wave 3 of kind of the virus load, and people were dying in the hospitals that should have been vaccinated, forever what you may believe. And you start seeing that doctors have this thing called the Hippocratic Oath. It's so very well built into their world that they should first do no harm, that they should be there to treat, that they shouldn't care about the human and their choices, that they should make those decisions irrespective just on the sanctity of human life. Okay? And so doctors were starting to say, I don't want to treat someone if they come in my ER and they're not vaccinated. Let them die. That is burnout, right? Because they watch these people that could have made a decision to take care and protect themselves, make decisions that they knew for a fact would create everyone their problems, right? And so I think what we're facing is the same thing. Those same clients, as we start screaming these things that ransomware needs us to put in layers, we need to charge you more, quite potentially. I have to build centers of excellence and SOCs and internal teams and all of this policy we didn't even know existed. That needed to exist, and that the SMB is not ready to hear, and do. And so you watch these people, just die a death that could be prevented if they would just get on board with us. You said something to me before the show. I'd love for you to repeat it for this. Let's take a sec for this. So we've got, this is the biggest topic. Okay, I lied. I can't read that far. This is one of the biggest topics. This is my best friend, Brian Wheeler. I love this guy. Worked side by side with him towards the end of my career at my former MSP. Just one of the most humble, amazing humans in the world. But said one of the biggest topics that is often only discussed during the exit interview. Yeah, true story. Or worse, right, Brian? Like other exits, and we've seen them. So, yeah. And then my buddy Kyle in the audience as well. I'm just saying, hey, what's up, Kyle? So what I was going to ask you, so before the show, we were talking about my video I made today demonstrating Spring for Shell, right?
Yeah.
And you said something kind of powerful, and I hope we can recreate that. I hate the camera dilemma, right, when you're on camera.
Good.
But go ahead and say it again for the benefit of the audience.
Yeah, I love following guys like you and Dom and some of these other security researchers, and you guys get such joy out of like, hey man, I recreated this attack, or check out this new novel attack. And I envy you because I don't get any joy out of that.
Yeah.
It terrifies me. It's one more open door in every one of my clients that I have to go check for. It's one more, I mean, that burnout was.
It used to be you had a predicted failure on a raid. You had a predicted failure on a server.
And you had all your answers for every one of those scenarios.
This would be like somebody coming and pulling a server drive out of the server room in those old days as an attack. And you had no control of it, and all that needed to happen was the door be locked, and you can't get the door locked. Or you don't understand how to lock the door, or you don't understand what to do about it or detect it.
Yes.
And so we were talking about that, and what touched me about this, and we'll get to comments here in just a second. What touched me about this is, like, I do genuinely live to raise the tide. I genuinely do believe that if we don't change this and drive change in these SMB as well as mid-sized and large-sized enterprise, I see the same things in vendors. I see the same things. Let's not even get into. I obviously not the finger pointing guy, but it's just as bad or worse. In some of that same constituency, the board rarely ever talks about these things. There's not an acceptance of risk and understanding of risk. And so this doesn't just live as an SMB problem, in my opinion. But if you are a practitioner, which we are, that are trying to look at risk, assess that, make decisions to protect it, and help guide people with good education, and then you watch them just make the wrong choice, and you watch the system change. And to your point, you watch me come out and talk about this new vulnerability that's so ubiquitous and everybody can do it, and if you can't. But I think what I wanted to say to that, because and this is Matt excusing Matt, so I'll do it self-aggrandizingly, I suppose, or apologizingly, is that I feel like we're all trying to fight this challenge that there is ignorance in the SMB, and I don't mean that negatively, just as a descriptive factor, and that they really genuinely are not educated where they need to be about the risk, about how much is in their responsibility zone, about what those things are and what matters. And so when I bring it out, I'm trying to show that, right, in a way. But I do genuinely get excited that I can do this, that I'm learning, that I'm able to change this, and and show it and demonstrate it in a way that people can understand, I hope, right? So that they do something about it. If you were at the hospital holding a loved one's hand when they have COVID, and I've actually talked to my Uber drivers, learned so much stuff from my Uber drivers, they're amazing. But if you talk to my Uber driver, he's like, yeah, my brother died, and my wife and I were massively against getting the vaccine, and I held his hand as he died and watched it happen, and man, I went and got it. And you're like, yes, but you're watching your friends get ransomware. You're watching your friends get email compromises. You're watching your friends get in these situations, and that change isn't happening,
Right.
at least not fast enough.
Right.
So I actually took away that I'm going to try to be better about making sure to describe the purpose of a lot of my excitement in video, rather than letting it fall somewhat, unfortunately, from a privileged space. Then,
Well, and you think very much in the big picture, small business, and can we get them moving forward?
yeah, you're living in the
Real-
tactical with sword in your hand in a way.
And the conversations I've started having with my team, it was one of those things I suffered alone.
Yeah.
For like a year and a half.
I drank in the beginning. I mean,
You
yeah,
drank,
100%.
and now I'm starting to talk to our own team and other people, and everyone's like, "Oh, you too?" And like
Dude,
the
right?
common themes
the
of like
camaraderie of battle, if you will, in that regard.
Like that moment of like all of us every morning dreading to pull up the phone because you don't know what alert's going to be on Teams, and is that alert the end of $100 million company or a multiple
like you said
of
earlier,
that?
what, $1 billion, right? Or $6
Every
billion
day
that
we got
touch.
these co-managed customers, and every morning you wake up just afraid that next alert is the sign that you failed and thousands of people are out of a job, or a $100 million company went upside down, and it's because you couldn't move fast enough for you couldn't get the customer to make the right choice.
This is important what you just said here,
and it's heavy.
I really think this is actually endemic of the people that do choose to carry this sword
Correct.
today. And what I mean by that is the words you just said was, I failed.
Uh-huh.
No, there's a lot bigger picture shaping out
Sure.
here than that. But in reality, if your one hope and dream is to not let that happen, then yes, there is a personal attribution and cost and ascription to that.
Your best technicians are the people who say, I care, you're my customer, I take personal responsibility, I'm invested.
And now you're watching
you
suffer, and you know I failed because I couldn't convince you, I wasn't fast enough. And to your point, we weren't mature enough of an operation. We don't have a security founding. It's not funded properly. We can't have the right conversation.
We're just trying to do our best. Or
Yeah.
we instead of working on security, we spent 2 months working on NCE.
Yeah.
Like these are the challenges
True
we have
story.
to work through. Right?
Love to say that out loud to you, my friends at Microsoft. But yeah, fair story.
And then the common conversations of like, well, what's that like? Well, anytime we see an alert that we worry, like I talk to our team, same symptoms, can't eat.
Yeah.
Don't eat for days. Have this pit in their stomach. Can't sleep.
I remember
sleepless
getting
nights.
10 people in a boardroom and working on firewalls to add blocks to ports because we found something. And it's that, you're right. Like it's PTSD. It's traumatic.
It's extremely traumatic.
Yeah.
And
and we've had some of those in operational things before. I've had servers just ghosted because a raid failed.
Yeah.
But those feel outside of my control.
Those are acts of God.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You can mentally process an act of God you have no hope of adjusting.
Yeah.
And some of these 0 days, if you got hit by hafnium, there's some argument that you could
But
maybe
if you got hit by
freaking
freaking hafnium, I didn't cuss Tim Choquette. If you got hit by freaking hafnium in 2022, you have a problem.
Correct. But if you got hit originally, there was an argument that, hey, you should add a WAF. Why are you running Exchange?
Yeah.
But if a 0 day takes you out, that you had no, fine, you'll log for J or something. But these things where, it's MFA and you've been trying to get MFA, but you just didn't get it done. You have some personal feeling of like or
you were the technician that turned it off to potentially try to fix something. Like I've seen that in an incident before.
Yeah.
Right? And I think the answer is, big picture thought process forward. And I know I'm not speaking towards the emotional part very much, but the big picture is as automation and orchestration become normalized, more of this becomes, okay, how fast after a 0 day can I get this remunerated or fixed and resolved, right, protected? How quick can I patch, and how effective am I at patching? What's my chance of success? And what do my customers allow me to patch? Let's just go back to that. This is one of those choices.
To know when I'm not getting patched?
This is one of those choices. Let's just touch on this, right? The customer that says to you, don't shut me down in the middle of the day. Don't you shut me down tonight. We don't have these abilities to say this one's critical. Sorry, you didn't have HA. Let's talk about HA.
Right.
Let's talk about going cloud. And so I think that as we continue to go forward, those processes will change this. But you're right. If you're in the front lines of this today and you're living in this as a practitioner, it's pretty tough.
It's heavy.
I mean, it's heavy. And you lose a lot.
Yeah.
and you almost get desensitized to the loss, or you stop caring about the customer. Right? There's only a couple ways to protect
There's
yourself.
There's only a couple
from
ways
that.
to go.
Yeah, and that's the doctor again. That's them saying, "I don't care if you die. I'm sorry, you should have had a vaccine."
I think there's a mental health crisis that's brewing in the small business MSP
in the
field.
world.
In the world, but in the MSP
Yeah.
field especially, because like you said, I think there's only a couple places people go.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of substance abuse problems that are hidden. There's, whatever your substance of choice is, whatever it is, how you escape. I think there's a lot of that.
And there's
we've
healthy
seen
ways,
it.
right? There's ways
Sure.
to, and this is a life thing. Back to, I'm going to touch on this topic in just a second. So, Jared Taylor says, great subject, often ignored and downplayed till it boils over. Yeah, because I think boiling over is when people can realize there's a problem. It's when empathy is forced.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
When you've got this, somebody said it earlier in the exit interview. Empathy is one of these things where if you empathize with people, you often feel things you don't want to feel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's the reality of it, right? But empathy's forced when it boils over. When the world blows up and everything's stopped and it's right in your face, the empathy is forced in a way because you're sharing empathy potentially, right? You're sharing the loss.
Right.
And so you have this kind of forced bring together. And I do think that can make us very strong out of this.
Sure.
I think it's about survival until then, however.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
John then jumps in with part of the cause is work-life balance. I actually had the coolest conversation. Chris Hoos, you'll hear me reference him a lot in my conversations. He was our CEO at Choose Networks and really just one of the most positive, forward humans I've ever met. Not overtly nice to people. I don't mean it that way. I'm not saying he's negative. But just if he was given two choices, he would choose the positive one. And just had a lot of brilliance from him. I learned a lot from Chris. But one of the things that stuck out was I was talking to him about how my value system as an engineer was that I would work from sundown. That I was the yes guy. You got a project on team 2 and I'm on team 1, I'll help you out.
Make it happen.
And that's how I grew. I mean, that's where I got to where I was. Don't get me wrong. But I didn't see my family. I wasn't a good husband. I was not a good father. I absolutely wasn't. And but I cared about the mission and I solved things and we grew and there was a financial income benefit from it. But he said to me one day, I said to him, I'm in work-life balance. He goes, Matt, get a balance board out. Are you ever in balance or are you staying in balance? Right? And I think the point is that work-life balance as it's defined and the statement is if you are going to be at this higher cost to you emotionally, if you're going to be at this higher cost to you from a life kind of burden from the as a practitioner in cyber or practitioner in technology, we kind of have a bit of an arrogance, but it also comes with a bit of pride. And it also comes with a bit of love for what we do and a little bit of passion. And so like now you're having to just constantly fail in a world where we're not used to failing. I don't fail most of the time.
I felt that way with like this whole idea of our industry is moving to you're gonna have incidents, detect them, respond.
That's what I preach.
Right. But I have an emotional problem with that of no, I don't want to have incidents. I want to prevent them. And it's almost a whole paradigm shift we all have to get to of I want to find incidents. We want to catch them
I'm trying to preach,
and deal with them. But it's so hard to change even that mental mindset because it's hard not to feel like every incident, even when you catch it early, feels like, but I could have prevented that. And that's a whole learning curve.
You know what I'll say about that? I think so at the former MSP I was at, I don't want to not use their name. I'm not trying to be elusive. I just you can go research. It takes 5 seconds. But at the former MSP, we documented 67 incidents over the course of a year and a half. Because we got really good at finding them. We were really big. We had decent practices. This was the exact same thing you're saying. And as the next one came in, I just didn't feel it anymore.
Right. Eventually you
just got where you're like, the only way I solve this is by finding them. And it really comes from, and I know I'm beating a drum on this one, but if you have identify and detect as your first two, and then you have protect, or identify and protect as your first two, and then you have detect. Once you detect, it's about how fast did I detect? How fast did I respond? How fast did I recover? And so you're actually seeing that most of this lives in the incident.
Yes.
It doesn't live in what we think is in protection.
Prevention. Yeah.
Yeah, it lives in the incident. So I think once you make peace with that, it might be like an ER doctor. At some point, it's about how quickly can I close the aorta? How fast can I reduce the pressure?
How quickly can I stop the bleeding?
Yeah. And I think there's maybe even it's a different person. Like maybe that is a different person that has to have that. And I think you guys have talked about this. You're separating some of that. We did too. I was the person. I love incidents, right? It was a puzzle. It was a game. It was a reduction quantity. And so like, I feel like it's possible that what we have decided to shoehorn people into needs a dedicated unit.
Well, because it's very different workflows. If you're an engineer, you're building things, you're responding to escalations, you're trying to drive stuff forward.
Right.
The problem with incidents, they require detail,
Yep.
dedicated time. You got to go spend hours looking through logs.
Process.
You got to have a process,
Yeah.
procedure. There's lawyers involved.
There's all of it.
And that doesn't fit with your engineer who's like, I don't have time for an incident today. We're deploying X, or I'm deploying MFA today. I don't have time to look at that. Right.
Irony in its irony state.
Correct.
Right? I'm going to protect someone else, and yet I have to be distracted by this. And I think, whether we knew it or not, presciently, what we decided was the orgs didn't have the qualifications. We weren't being negative. We were just being
understood.
empirical.
Yes.
And so we decided to centralize that response and then use the orgs as extensibility where necessary.
Right.
And so, like, for example, a business email compromise comes in. It still may come down to an engineer at that team that has access, but they're going to do checkbox, and then someone else is going to handle it from the comms perspective, general manager, and then or a security person or me, depending on the elevation of it, right? And so I think, I hadn't actually correlated those in my head, but I do believe that took pressure off of the people that were still feeling it. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Like, they still had to talk to the customer. Yes. They still had to feel the same pain. The difference was we put the right type of humans that were there to respond to it, contain it, and move forward back to a normal state. And this is kind of unique to the MSP industry. At PAX 8, I have security people. They respond to this. I have teams that are dedicated to all of that, and they respond to it, right? And so, like, that is their world. It isn't the person that took the call. And I think different in an MSP, right, is that you usually don't have a delineation in those divisions to some extent.
Well, and most MSPs would struggle to be able to dedicate a person. That's a cost center. Right,
true.
You're a 12-person company. You don't have money for a 13th.
Why do you make my percentages hard? Why couldn't you make it a 10-person company so I could add 10% by adding another human?
We're a 35-person company. We dedicated 3 people to it.
Yeah,
that's still a cost center. We decided it was important.
And now you have to offset that cost center and work towards it.
We're working towards that. It was too important to not do, but that's one of the places we came to. You want to talk about, okay, I'm an engineer, or I'm a technician, or I'm a business leader who's responsible for this.
Yep.
There's the personal stuff, like you said, like working towards work-life balance.
And we'll come back to that in a sec, but yeah.
But then from a business, I think you've got to figure out, that same separation. That's kind of a sort of work-life balance. It's a engineering versus security balance.
Yeah, what are my people most, like, satisfied by? Like, if you're really honest.
Part of it for us was, like, I couldn't carry the leading engineering and leading architecting and leading security hats anymore.
True story.
It was too much.
Yeah, true story.
And
because
it was
the balance
stressful.
Would always fall to the immediacy of the incident.
Correct.
It has to.
Or there was it was just in the back of your head of you're not doing enough on security. You're not doing enough on security, and that pressure is a lot.
Work-life balance as well. I don't think this is a unique problem for this, but I want to touch on it as well. And one other thing, Chris also paid for a $4,000 life plan for me, which I thought was the largest cockamamie bunch of bullshit I'd ever heard in my life. Swear to God, like, it was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. But in the same breath, I'd rather say yes than say no. I'd rather experience than not experience.
Yes.
And so I went to this, and I met with Rich in Clarinda, Iowa. Okay, and we sat in his farmhouse, and I cried for 2 days because they went through, and he said, they have an approach where they do the Japanese style of walking around a problem and looking at it before we ever present any solutions versus the American problem of solve. I love it. I'm a solve guy.
Yeah.
But as we went through it, it was like, he talked about what's my recharge cycle, what gives me something, what takes away from me. Like, I found out I'm an introvert. Like, I just hard to believe, but I actually do not get recharged by these.
You're the outgoing introvert that everybody knows.
I get recharged by going and sitting on my bicycle for 2 hours, putting on headphones and listening to music and not interacting with a single human.
Right.
And every time I tried to do that when I was an engineer, I got a call.
Yes.
I took a page.
Yes.
Right. I took an email. I had to stop. I had a guy scream at me. I might break into tears on this. A guy I really respect, but maybe a little less now. But he owned this really big medical practice, and I was up on the top of a mountain. I just finished climbing 1,000 or 1,400 foot at Red Rock Canyon. I was sitting up there, dying, breathing, and he'd been calling me the whole way up. And I took it, and he just starts screaming at me. And he's like, "Why is this shit down? What am I doing?" And it was that before cyber.
Yeah.
I already had that before cyber.
Yeah.
Now I have a constituent that doesn't understand what happened. It's not like a server fail. It's not like we didn't do HA. This is you had MFA. And someone leveraged under it with evil Genix, stole your token because I didn't get to set this yet, or I didn't even know. Like, you get into some of this where that humility aspect of what you are, which is why I love you, makes you feel like shit when it happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's tough, man. And
Yeah.
there's those costs. I like to tell people there's always costs. How do you recharge that cost? So the life plan taught me how to recharge that cost. And I got involved in charities. I got involved in more stuff with my kids. Like I was a bad dad. I'm not lying about that. I was one of those where I was like, I'm paying for it. I see them. I teach them lessons, but they're individual human units. And it was my justification. And so definitely learned a lot in that. That was about 8 years ago.
Okay.
It changed my career. I make 5 times what I made then. I'm happier. I'm doing the right things. There's this concept called a habu, which is your highest and best use.
Yeah.
And so for a long time, I went through at Choose and then the next MSP, figuring out my habu, what made me happy and I could do the most effect for people.
Yeah.
And I think that doesn't always come as a luxury in most MSPs.
No.
You don't have this hyper growth and Yeah. And only because of that was I able to make it to the place I am today in my understanding of it or how I cope with it, I suppose. But yeah, great point, John. Thank you. We haven't made it through very many comments. This doesn't happen often. This is crushing. We're too small and important to be a target. Yeah, and that's one of the things I try to dispel, right? Because it's like I actually just went through. We have an internal foundations class. Remember my security foundation? I'm teaching that internally to all of our internal.
CIS top 18 for the win.
Amen, buddy. And so I'm teaching that, and they'd never heard of Shodan.
Wow.
And so what I'm getting at is to dispel the myth. Why when we're dealing with geopolitics are they asking us to speak on Facebook? Why are they asking? It's because information changes things.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so the point is, like, that's why I try to show this. This is why it's so easy to get to all these ubiquity controls. It's not about small. For me, it's about a next win. Yeah. For me, it's about the next vulnerable thing I can manipulate and take control of and make money. Not me, the other person.
No, understand. Yeah, that's the threat actor mindset.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So that's great. Thank you, Jessica. I love Jessica. Watching her career take off over the last year has been awesome, too. She was an aspiring GRC, I think, and she got her first job, and she's driving towards cyber, so good to see you here, my friend.
That's awesome.
And if I misquoted that, you can punch me later. I'm sorry, Jessica, but that's what I remember. And then love these streams and the talk going on right now. It does feel like an impossible hill to climb sometimes. Yeah, and I love that the name is Risk. I'm assuming that's the YouTube follower, so they can call it whatever they want. It's not like they're just type your name. Yeah. But Risk, I agree with you. And I think sometimes it's one of those where you want to just sit down and watch the battle happen over the top of the hill. I mean, I feel like, my grandmother used to use a term of, Matt, you burn the candle at both ends, it'll eventually catch up with you. Mm-hmm. Right? I picture this horizontal candle.
Yeah.
I don't think this would work very well.
No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't. Yeah.
It would burn out. Anyways, physics of candles aside. My grandmother used to say, burn the candle at both ends. And I feel like we're being forced to burn the candle at both ends right now. And more ends than I even had to deal with 3 years ago when I was in a smaller MSP or 5 years ago, whenever it was.
Well, so I wonder if we break this down into like pragmatic for the tech kind of perspective and then bigger picture.
Sure.
I mean, like you talked about, you went and found help. Frankly, that's where I ended up going was I found a counselor who could help me. Like, and I got little kids.
Sometimes you need just to be told it's okay.
Told it's okay. And sometimes you need somebody to help you, like, listen to it and go, well, here's a different perspective.
Yep.
Right? Let me teach you some.
I get that with my eyes. I have 2 perspectives at all times. They point in the same direction.
Nice. But I needed that other perspective. I need some, like, mental skills. So, like, let's talk about how you can process things. Yeah. Like, I got to the point where it was like, I could stop and tell you exactly what my emotions were doing. I'm escalating. I've got the anxiety.
Which really was just codification of what you were already dealing with, right?
Like, but he was like able to define it and give me the life skills to say, here's how you get off of that train. Because I could tell you where the train was heading and where it was going.
Yeah,
I didn't know how to stop. Right. So I think finding communities matter, whether that's a faith community or it's a Discord community.
Well, that was the thing. I don't believe in
out
organized religion personally. Sure. I am fairly faithful. And I don't mind sharing that. I'm a pretty open book. And so, when I was going through the life plan, that was a real problem because the life plan was based on adding the religious aspect to this. And that's where we came to, but you can give back. You can do other things, charity. You can drive those things and not necessarily do it by participating in church. But what it was really getting at is find a community. It's not tied to any of these things. It gives you an anchoring point that makes you feel good when you feel like shit losing all the time.
Well, people you can talk to. Just have an honest conversation. And I think even in our own companies, like I had a really revealing conversation with our team where I was like, one of you struggle with this. I struggle with this. And it was like, oh, yeah, me too. This is what it feels like in the morning. Inclusion. And I was like, wait a minute. We've all been suffering for 2 years and not had the conversation amongst ourselves.
Yeah. But that's an emotional maturity challenge, right?
Sure.
I think one of the things you face, and this is a cultural challenge as well in the United States, but is that, you feel like you can't be vulnerable. It's not acceptable to be vulnerable. It might make you weaker. And I feel like, and maybe feels just gotten used twice, but I do feel like that is something that has to change. I feel like it's okay to talk about what you're dealing with. I feel like it's okay. Now, is it okay to dwell in it? No, because then you just die. But is it okay to talk about it and find
Yeah.
camaraderie aspects and understand that that dude still made the choice to be here today, even though right now
Yes.
he's at the end of that rope.
Right.
He can't take another one today. Or she. I want to be inclusive. Right? And so
Yeah.
I think that challenge gives me more respect for that human. And also maybe I want to pick up more of the rope so they don't have to.
Right.
And eventually back to that original point, there's a balance. And that comes back to, at some point, that comes back to having enough revenue to have the right density of people
Yeah.
in a world where MSPs have only focused on efficiency, profitability, and EBITDA on those things through growth and efficiency and efficacy through efficiency. And so you get into this world where we're now having to say, no, you're going to constantly lose. You're going to do the right things and reduce the risk by 80 or so percent. And the other 20% will be how you deal with it and reduce it and function.
Respond to it.
And that means you have to fund that differently potentially.
Yes.
Right? As not just a cost center or I dropped my EBITDA, but an insurance, a protection, a reduction in risk externally, which is coming, right? For us. And so I feel like this has so many facets to it, but I do believe that talking about it in general should not be a sign of weakness, right? And it should be something where being vulnerable more is probably better for everyone.
Right.
I was talking at lunch with Kyle, and I watched a TED talk by this girl from the Baptist church, the full of hatred.
Westboro.
Yeah. And she was the daughter that was spewing hate. Everybody thought it was cute. There was an 8-year-old spewing it, right?
Man.
So it was this like huge national media back then. So she was doing a TED talk about 6 or 7 years ago, and she said, I learned one concept, and it's the most fundamental and powerful concept you can get, is you assume no ill intent. And she said the way she learned it was she was spewing hate, and everybody would spew hate back at her as a normal response as humans. You're horrible. She was probably a horrible human in that definition. And so you have that as this underlying current. And she said nobody could ever break through because I was just shielded to that negative.
Yep.
Right? But somebody she met started telling her, hey, I want to understand you. I want to be nice to you. I respect you. And then she said, wait a minute. I talked through that human into understanding that he was just nice to me, didn't beat me up. And I started questioning what my parents were teaching me.
Wow.
I started questioning. And so it was this concept that I've followed in my life for the last few years after seeing it was I try to assume that the person sitting across from me just has a different understanding, a different set of desires, a different set of understandings of the world. And so they're not being a turd. They're just reacting to the same circumstances I would react to if I was given those same variables. And so as you start thinking about that, it lets you be more positive about it.
Right.
And again, they're coping mechanisms at the end of the day, right?
Yes.
But they created a situation where I can be nice to an enemy, right? Where I can see someone that completely just expositioned the way I see something and still find it okay to go, I want to understand you.
Right.
And maybe I'm wrong.
Right.
The best compliment I ever got was from Benno van Weyenberg, and Belgian, amazing engineer. They said, Matt, you hold extremely loosely to passionate beliefs. Right?
Yeah.
And I think it's that willingness to change and understand, but it comes from wanting to know genuinely what variables are you dealing with, Nathan?
Right.
And that's why I bring this all back to that being open and talking about it. I have to imagine was probably one of the more validating moments as you talk to these other engineers and go, it's not just me.
Yeah.
Right? Imagine a soldier living after PTSD thinking they're just crazy. How much different is it when they go to a PTSD group and they get to talk about it? And I feel like I'm not the big touchy-feely guy.
Yeah.
But I would say that I feel like there is an argument for normalizing these conversations.
Yeah, it is. I mean, think about it. We're on the front lines in the battle with Ukraine. It's the Russian government has stated we're coming after.
Well, in the battle with anybody that's coming after us. I mean, like APT-10 from 100 years ago, and I think the point is we're just opening our eyes to it because it's now forced empathy.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of back to my point.
And it's forced us to learn new skills, whether that's coping skills or healthy living. Like that work-life balance is a great phrase. That's really hard to accomplish.
That's what it was. Okay, I saw this. So she said, I have yet to get my cybersecurity job. I apologize, Jessica. I was just thinking positively for you in the future. But she's getting the interviews. So fantastic. It's awesome. Let's see here. So we've got, how do you deal with the stress of it all? Burning the candle at both ends can only go so long.
I heard that, Tim.
I don't, honestly. I don't. I live with this understanding that I understand. Like, imagine you were in a 100-year war. And I'm not trying to steal honor or glory. I'm trying to make corollaries. But imagine you were in a 100-year war. and you knew there was no end in it. You're middle of it. You're just a cog in a wheel, and there's nothing
Yeah.
going to change.
Yeah.
You either live through that and continue to fight, or you don't. And so for me, I genuinely believe if we don't change this, my kids don't have the same life we did.
I agree.
And
I
so
agree.
that's my piece in that solace. But yeah, I probably will burn out at some point, right? Like if I continue to lose, at some point you're just
I
going
like
through
the
it.
point you're making.
It's probably why it
because
was a 100-year war. They all sucked mid battle. They didn't want to do it either.
I like what the point you're making is like, I don't think you can make this go away. Like I've honestly, there's been
No.
moments I've seen the plumbing truck go down on the
shit.
highway, and I've thought, damn, maybe I want to go fix toilets. Because
Right.
there's a beginning
Sure.
and an end
No
to the
doubt.
repair,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
the toilet's done, the leak
You
is
flush
stopped.
that handle and it goes down.
And
golf balls
I've
from back in
had
the
that
day,
thought of like maybe the
No,
only way out
100%.
is to leave the industry because
But you'd
It's not
still be
going to.
touched with it by your life, and you'd have the knowledge of what
I would.
caused it.
and I
That's
so
the
I'm with
challenge
you.
in cyber.
I'm with you that I can't get away from it. It's never going to go away. It's can I develop a healthy relationship and find
Yeah.
boundaries for it? Of
Can I make peace with my devil?
well, and there's going to be so much stress, and it's a matter of saying, okay, this is the line.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to have a counselor. Exercise is huge for me.
Yep.
I got to go lift heavy
Me
weights.
too.
Put a
That,
bunch
I
of
didn't
weight on
realize it
barbell.
either, dude. I, when I was going through that, let's just talk about reality. When I was an engineer doing that work, I gained over 300. I got 340 pounds.
Man.
I was huge. I've lost 120 pounds.
That's amazing.
Right? And I think I think this is the first time I've actually realized this, that was some of the ways I coped.
Yeah.
I sure did need
I
a
didn't-
cheeseburger at 6 and at 9.
Right.
Right? Like,
Well, and the other problem is like sometimes that stress, there's no way to let it out.
Yeah.
You go lift heavy weights, you go ride your bike hard. That physical exertion does something to that stress.
it does.
And it lets it out.
Yeah.
And so I have to exercise. I found a counselor.
But it's met by that phone ringing when I'm on the bike, or that
might-
inability to disconnect. I don't know about y'all. I still cannot disconnect. I do a good job of faking it. I try hard. I shut my phone off for more time. I'm in the mountains once a week, 1 week out of the year. But I have a backup phone.
Yeah.
And that backup
I
phone's
had that.
available.
I had that problem on Friday. I had a PTO day. My wife's out of town. I'm watching the kids, and my phone was going nuts. And it's really hard to turn that off. But I think that's what we have to build for each other. Is
Yeah.
we culturally as MSPs need to say, when are you checking out?
Yep.
And I've seen this with a couple of my engineers. They're like, hey, this weekend I'm off.
Yeah.
Hey, this and like also you have to kind of sometimes pull yourself out of some things. Like I won't go look at some of the dashboards some of our security tools bring. Like
Because you might want to deal with it because you see it as something
or it's just
operational.
this incredible amount of data you can't process.
Yep.
Like, oh, here's all the 500 slightly risky IP connections
Yeah.
for this one client. And you're like,
Yeah.
one of those could be the end of the world, or these are just bad
More
ads that are on
stuff.
the IP that was used previously to do something. And so I think you have to start thinking pragmatically. How can I turn things off?
Yeah.
What channels do I not need to be in on Teams, or I only need to check on a regular basis when I get tagged?
And
I
the
think-
problem with that is you might feel like you're out of the team or not valuable,
Uh-huh.
right? There's this balance
Yes.
in that choice. And every time I back out of a team, and maybe I'm perpetuating this, so you can just slap me if you need to, but every time I back out of a team, one of the fears is like, I've now let somebody down in that team. I've now failed to do what I
Yes.
hoped. I don't know.
This is the culture.
Yeah.
We need to build that culture that says, not only should you get out of that team, but I'm going to ask you to get out of that team because I know it's better for your mental health.
Yeah.
And I'm fully capable of tagging you when I need your expertise.
And try taking that
trust
away
me.
from somebody with the pride and arrogance aspect that I talked about as being somebody as a practitioner. I don't mean that negative. They're attributes to me, right? And it's like, you would have said that to me, it would have been a hard fight.
Right.
And you have this cultural challenge there too. Again, to your point. So,
But is
Yeah.
it you either have that fight as a company, as a culture,
or you watch people implode,
or you watch people end up, in bad places. And I
and some of those bad places can end in not living. Right,
completely
and
agree. I
that's the
think that is
reality
going to be. I think there's going to be the outcome for many, and that's sad. And that's part of why we want to talk about it. Is we can get ahead of this. We have to normalize this. We all have to be honest about this burden.
Yeah, where are you? Yeah,
It's
and I think what you're seeing too is you have 30,000 unfilled or something. I don't remember the number I last saw. They're all made up statistics anyway, so don't trust it. But a massive number of unfilled cybersecurity jobs and tech jobs
correct.
with technical capabilities. And so you walk into this where if we normalize this and people make it okay to talk about it, which should happen, you may find companies that cannot hire people because they have not set themselves up to enable and empower those individuals
Yes.
to succeed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not just that, it's I care for my coworkers and finding out that we're all waking up with the same pit in our stomach because of anxiety.
Yep.
let's not live that way. I don't want to
No,
do that for
let's
another
not do
20
that.
years.
Yeah.
That's not fun.
And some of that's changing the narrative with the customers. Some of that is setting the expectation. And I challenge MSPs to do this. Hey, customer, let's lay out what it takes to protect you. And by the way, I'm only going to get you to 85%. Your seatbelt's probably a 92%, right? But I'm only going to get you 85, maybe. And that's not going to count these home runs that might hit. They're outside of statistical anomaly, right? They're the ones we write off and go too far outside, not part of our statistical
Well, let me ask you a question, though. That 85% of those 160 incidents you had, how many of them would have been covered? 167.
67.
67
in
incidents.
a year and a half. It doesn't matter, but yeah.
That 67, what percentage of them would have been blocked by that just 85%?
Almost all.
Almost all. That's what I'm finding is when we
have... They would have still been documented. We would have still seen the things, but they would not have been successful.
Right. And that's what we're finding. So to kind of bring this to the next piece, which is a phrase you use all the time, is defensibility. That's our other one great hope is if you can consistently patch, close open ports, enforce MFA, get a decent SOC across your customer base, you've covered so much of the vectors that you've also... I want to get to a place with our customers where in a year or two, because it's going to take us a long time, it's a long journey, when somebody gets breached or gets an incident.
Attorneys get to call it a breach. We call it an incident.
When there's an incident, I don't feel guilty for it because I know we did our best effort. And that's, I think, the other thing. Let's define what a defensible best effort is.
Amen. And you know what you're talking about too, though? We came from a world where it was a cool kids, cool nerds, still like little Star Wars gear and, nerds.
Yeah.
But cool kids building cool stuff without a lot of boundaries, without a lot of other things around it. It was a professional service, but more in the sense of professional plumbing.
Right.
And I think the challenge is if I hire an attorney because I'm defending a criminal instance or defending a civil instance, there's no way my attorney walks in and goes, I'm going to win this case for you. No doubt. Right. I'm going to win it 100%, bro. If they do, they're probably failing you. And I think that's the challenge. We have to start being more the attorney, more that professional service. My doctor comes in and says, you might live 6 months if you do this.
Right.
They don't come in with guarantees. The difference is we've always been those that delivered that capability, so it's been ascribed to us.
Oh, yeah, it's assumed by our customers.
We'll have that
hey, I'm paying you for IT. You got me covered, right? Yeah. You got me covered, right?
And that's that knowledge gap, right?
Yeah.
And I think that part of this has to be the maturation of the organization to say, hey, client, I'm going to do all these things. You still might lose.
And I think that's where the frameworks come in.
They do.
If you walk a customer through a CIS top 18, you do a good job. By the end of it, they will understand the shared risk.
Not. Yeah.
Because you're going to show, hey, we were able to only cover this control to 80% because of whatever the variables are.
And see this control about supply chain? I'm your supply chain.
Correct.
And I need to use the right tools. That means I might have to spend more. That might means I have to change the way I practice
and there's going to be risk based on this decision. We have to make this decision, but it brings in risk.
And once you make that risk understanding, I don't keep the guilt because you chose the risk.
Right. I mean, it's catch-22. We keep adding tools to help our security. Each one of those tools is a supply chain risk.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And nobody's ever tooled their way into security, nor has any surgeon performed without a scalpel. I mean, poking that finger through the skin is going to be rough, right? Like, it's going to have some damage down the road.
Yeah.
So I think the point is that we need the tools, but you're watching maturation, even in you. Look at a year or two ago. Look at me 3 years ago when I knew. The maturation is there, and once it's there, the operations follow, the conversations follow, the change follows. I think you still have similar problems that scale worse in the enterprise space. What I mean by that is you have like legacy debt. You have tons and tons of people involved. You have boards that don't give a shit.
The real risk is in the mid-market.
Yep.
Enterprise tends to have publicly traded. They're audited.
I'll take that with a grain of salt. Like a large grain.
But at least there's some level of, they might have a CISO. They might have some level of policy.
There's somebody fighting this
every time
fight
I get
inside.
into the mid-market, they're always balancing business initiatives with security. And it's terrifying.
And they're choosing how they define security, so it allows them to make the wrong decision.
Correct. And they only have so much capital to spend as an IT department. And oftentimes they need the strategic win rather than security win. The mid-market is where it gets scary.
It does. And S in the SMB too.
But it's also but the mid-market is also our opportunity to
I think they're both the most fixable.
Yes.
I do believe, because a lot of your mid-market is going to have massive tech debt. They're not going to make their own code a lot of times. They're going to have this position where, I've got a server and AD and ADFS and all these things, but if I was able to reimagine them, I might not. And so I think, and I'm not making this like massive push to cloud. Like I get into talks with other security researchers that think of it differently. That's fine. But when I'm speaking about the S to the SMB, if I had the same, we're going to go back to this, Legos all the time. They were always Legos. There were no Duplos. Or you didn't have to deal with the block of wood in the middle of your Legos.
You didn't have Technic.
Right, you didn't have Technic. Dude, let's keep going. You didn't have any, what was the stupid Erector set coming in? Right. You didn't have any Play-Doh build. I don't know, I'm running out of Lincoln Log.
Constructs.
Yeah, Constructs. You didn't have any of that coming in. You had the same bolts. And my point is, if I'm looking at one Active Directory forced or Azure Active Directory instance bolted onto some IAM structure with SCIM and SAML and OIDC, that's it. I can make the same template every time. I can apply the same thing the same way. When it fails, I can assess the entire system and change the entire system for thousands of businesses. And I think that the scale's coming in that. And I'm not painting this perfect Camelot picture, but I am saying it'll be a different focus. It will be an education focus of those customers to get them down that path. Because they might have just bought a VMware cluster and they've got VMware Horizon and all these desktops. You're like, no, we got to change this. This is how I can manage it effectively. Not you, me.
And there's some good things driving that. Frankly, for the first time in forever, insurance companies are our friends.
Amen.
Because they're like,
even if Travelers did go a little ham on all MFA on every switch, I like it.
I like it too. And also, like I've directly heard, hey, we won't insure you if you have an Exchange server. Thank you. Finally, somebody's making good decisions on that. So, so there's hope. There's a lot of positive things.
All that maturation that lets me be happy, right? And you've got a national cyber law that's coming in for reporting that's coming in. We're starting to see the wake up, just like the Industrial Revolution, right? You build houses that fell in when it snowed. We didn't know that 16-inch studs were probably right. And guess what? In Florida, when you got hurricanes, you probably need hurricane straps. And they need to go down in the foundation. And they need to be every 14 feet. Like, you get into this maturation of any industry. We just happen to be people with swords in our hands in the middle of it being that transition. And watching that death that creates the change be there. It's what's driving this, right?
And we're the one, we need to change as much as anybody. We're still guys deploying O3 servers.
I used to hide 3389 behind another port.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody, I appointed myself. Like, I'm humble enough to understand I suck.
Sneaky.
Oh, dude, I was like, no, man.
63,
85,
3089. Man, nobody's going to guess that.
Nobody, bro, because we're right under the 64,000. I didn't even know what Nmap was at the time, right? But I made the argument at the time. Yeah, but they all probably just do the 1,000 ports. Anyways, I digress. But we're way over time here. I don't like to run too long for everybody's time. I appreciate y'all sticking around. Learn to trust your peers to know what they're doing. I agree with that. That comes into that management aspect, and I know they're speaking back to that comment where I said, I want to be on these teams. And I think that's a fair point.
It is,
and it also comes from my own arrogance, right? Like me saying I need to be there to help them. I'm the only one.
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic unknown LinkedIn user, but you're 100% right. I'll take that one. I deserve it. And then you get into wanting to help, but not knowing when you're overdoing it is a hard balance, dude, right?
Yeah.
Because you can expend so much personal capital and so much emotional capital and so much care. Like how many times I literally, when I was migrating servers, to put this in perspective, when I was doing a P2V or a V2V, would move my mouse and watch it because I swear to God, I believed it made a difference in the outcome. Like, just to put how OCD I am.
Super technical people are still a little bit superstitious.
Yeah. And it came from Zen Server, because Zen Server, the actual end migration utility, was running on your local machine. So had you gone to sleep potentially,
so
it's planted in truth.
It's amazing.
When the data came on that nothing else did that, I still couldn't escape it. So I think we live in some of that. And dude, this has been a blast. I haven't had one run this far over. I think it's a topic we could probably talk about, maybe even in a long form with more MSPs and have a great conversation about it.
Good blog post could come out of this too.
Yeah, well, I don't know how to write. It's a tragic thing. But eventually they'll get me a writer. I had a writer at Iconic.
Oh, nice.
That's at the former MSP. I'm sorry. Yeah, but they literally would take my words. We'd record them on screen, and then she would go write it.
Oh,
she was amazing.
And
she would make fun of me and do like these self-deprecating things. It was just wonderful. Like,
that's awesome.
Yeah. I'm not a writer. I'm a speaker. All right, brother. Well, this was great. Let's close it out. I appreciate
Thank you for having me, man.
Yeah.
It's an important topic. So glad we get to talk about it.
Hey, if we could give people one thing out of this, I think it would be start trying to figure out what recharges you. Start trying to figure out, is it exercise, right? Is it shooting guns? Is it doing something that's just benign, like a video game? I know a guy that welds. One of my engineers in the former company welded as his methodology of dealing with things and stress.
And you're not alone. That's the other big thing.
Yeah, you're not alone. We suffer from it too.
Yeah,
all of us. Shared problem. So forced empathy, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely.
See y'all.